She handed Imani the laminated pass with 2 fingers, the way you'd hand something to someone you didn't want to touch. Here. Vanessa's smile was the kind that had never once reached her eyes. I pulled some strings, got you a service worker credential for the gala tonight. She held it up just long enough for the other girls to see, then let it drop onto the counter in front of Imani. At least this way they might let you through the back door. The boutique erupted. Not loud laughter, something worse. That controlled, knowing laughter that said, "We've been waiting for this moment." Imani stood behind the register and felt 27 pairs of eyes land on her body like a physical weight. She felt her jaw tighten, felt the familiar heat climb up the back of her neck. She picked up the pass. She didn't say a word. And nobody in that room, not Vanessa, not the girls laughing behind their hands, not the assistant manager who looked away. Nobody had any idea that the woman they were humiliating had already changed her last name. If you've ever been laughed at for something you couldn't change, your size, your clothes, where you came from, then you already know exactly what Imani Brooks felt standing behind that counter. And if you've ever smiled when every part of you wanted to scream, then this story is for you. Stay with us through all 5 parts. Because what happens next, at that gala, in that ballroom, in front of every single person who ever laughed, is the kind of thing that only happens when someone has quietly been building something the whole world underestimated. If this story moves you, hit that like button. Leave a comment with your city or country. I want to see how far this has traveled, and subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter. Because this one doesn't let up. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The boutique was called Elise & Co., and it sat on Michigan Avenue the way certain women sit in certain rooms, like it had always belonged there and had never once considered the possibility that it didn't. The windows were tall and clean, the lighting inside was calibrated, not bright. Everything about it was designed to make you feel like either you fit or you didn't, and the staff had been trained, formally or informally, it didn't much matter, to communicate that distinction without ever saying it out loud. Imani Brooks had worked there for 3 years. She was 28. She was plus size in a store that stocked a full range but only displayed sizes 2 through 8 on the mannequins. She bought her work clothes at a discount outlet 2 neighborhoods over and ironed them the night before every shift because she had always known, that she could not afford to look anything less than precise. She wore small gold stud earrings her grandmother had given her. She kept her natural hair in a clean, close style that took her 40 minutes every morning, and that Vanessa had once called low effort within earshot of 3 customers. Imani had smiled then too. That was the thing about Imani that nobody at Elise & Co. ever fully understood. Her patience was not weakness. It looked like weakness because she didn't fire back, didn't cry in the break room, didn't build alliances or whisper campaigns. She just kept working. She learned the inventory better than anyone else on the floor. She remembered customers' names, their daughters' birthdays, which silk scarves their mothers had admired 3 seasons ago. She made sales that the commission sheets logged under other people's names twice because of a floor scheduling error, and she reported it both times to the manager and was told it would be corrected, and it never fully was. She had stayed anyway. Her mother asked her once, they were on the phone, Imani sitting on the edge of her bed at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, still in her work clothes because she'd sat down to take off her shoes and somehow hadn't gotten back up. Her mother asked her why she kept going back to a place that treated her that way. "Because I'm good at it," Imani said, "and because one day that's going to matter." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Baby, it already matters. You're just surrounded by people who can't see it." Imani didn't respond to that. She just pulled off her left shoe and then her right and sat there in the silence of her apartment, thinking about how it was strange to be believed in by someone who had known you since before you could speak, and how that was both the most sustaining thing in the world and also somehow the loneliest. Vanessa Crowe had been hired 8 months before Imani, which in the culture of Elise & County meant she had seniority on the floor in the way that a wolf has seniority in a field. She was thin, light-skinned, and she dressed in a way that made customers assume she had money. She didn't, not really, but she understood performance well enough that it didn't matter. She had a boyfriend, Preston Hale, who drove a leased Mercedes and threw around names of people he claimed to know in a way that impressed the other girls on the floor, even though none of the names ever seemed to connect to anything real. Vanessa wasn't stupid. That was the part Imani had spent 3 years trying to square. A stupid person was easy to dismiss. Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing every time she looked at Imani a half second too long before answering a question. Every time she redirected a customer, Imani was already helping. Every time she said something like, "Oh, I didn't realize that came in your size," in front of a client, her voice perfectly calibrated between innocence and intent. She was strategic about it. She picked moments when the manager wasn't looking. She made sure there was always plausible deniability. And she had cultivated around herself a small orbit of women, Destiny, Kayla, and a rotating third, who laughed at the right moments and stayed quiet at the others. The thing that made it unbearable wasn't any single incident. It was the accumulation. It was the way 3 years of small cuts added up to something that felt like a wound that never got the chance to close. The rain started around 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday in October. The kind of Chicago rain that doesn't apologize. It just arrives, and it changes the city for as long as it feels like it. Customers thinned out. Destiny and Kayla had retreated to the back near the fitting rooms and were looking at something on one of their phones. Vanessa was near the front, reorganizing a display she'd already reorganized twice that morning because it gave her a reason to stand near the window and be seen from the street. Imani was at the register, going through a returns log, when the door opened. He didn't make an entrance. That was the thing she remembered afterward, when she had reason to remember, that there was nothing about the way he walked in that said, "Pay attention to me." He was tall, broad through the shoulders, wearing a plain dark Henley and a jacket that had seen real weather, not fashion weather. His hair was cut close, and he had the kind of face that was difficult to read the first time you looked at it. He was probably mid to late 30s. He moved through the door and stood just inside the threshold, looking around the store the way someone does when they're not sure exactly what they're looking for, but they know they need to find it soon. Vanessa saw him from the window display. Imani watched Vanessa's eyes make their assessment in under 4 seconds. The jacket, the jeans, the absence of visible watch or jewelry, the absence of whatever invisible signal it was that Vanessa used to sort people into categories. Vanessa turned back to the display. That was all. Just turned back, like he hadn't come in at all. Imani put down the returns log and walked out from behind the counter. "Hey," she said, approaching at an angle that wasn't aggressive, giving him room. "Can I help you find something?" He looked at her directly. His eyes were dark and he held eye contact a beat longer than most people did with strangers, but it wasn't aggressive either. It was more like assessing, measuring something she couldn't name. "I need a gift," he said, "for my daughter. She's turning 7. "That's a good age," Imani said, and she meant it in the way people mean things when they've actually thought about it. "What is she like? Does she have a color she's attached to right now, or is she in a phase where she changes it every week?" Something shifted in his face, just slightly. "Every week," he said. "Last week was orange. This week it might be green. I genuinely cannot keep up." Imani almost smiled. "Okay, then we don't commit to a color. We go for something that works whatever week it is." She walked him toward the accessories section, and he followed, and for the next several minutes they talked about his daughter, the way two people talk when they've both been around children enough to know that 7-year-olds have very specific opinions and will absolutely tell you when you've gotten it wrong. His name, he told her when she asked how to ring it up, was Roman D'Angelo. She didn't recognize it. She typed it into the purchase form without a second thought. He bought a silk scarf in deep emerald with a small gold edge, soft enough to be used a dozen different ways, neutral enough to work with anything. And when Imani wrapped it in the boutique tissue and folded the box with the clean corners that her manager had stopped caring whether she did or not, she was doing it because she actually wanted it to look nice for a little girl she'd never met. "She's going to love this," Imani said, handing him the bag. Roman took it and looked at her for a moment like he was deciding something. "You're the first person in this store who looked at me when I walked in." Imani blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The woman by the window," he said, nodding almost imperceptibly toward Vanessa, looked at me and turned around. Imani didn't say anything. The air between them was a little uncomfortable, and she didn't want to speak ill of a coworker in front of a customer, which was a rule she had for herself regardless of how that coworker behaved. "I noticed," Roman said. "That's all." He picked up the bag. "Thank you, Imani." He had read her name tag. She wasn't sure why that landed the way it did, but it did. I was almost at the door when Vanessa appeared. Imani saw it happen in slow motion. Vanessa had clocked the purchase bag, had done the recalculation, had decided to insert herself before he left. She stepped into the aisle with that tilted smile and said, loudly enough that Kayla and Destiny could hear from 15 feet away, "I hope Imani was helpful. She means well, but—" A small laugh. "We usually like our consultants to have a little more first-hand experience with the product range, if you know what I mean." The implication was clear. Someone like her doesn't really know luxury. Someone her size doesn't really know fashion. You might have been better served by someone else. Roman stopped. He turned around slowly. His face had not changed expression, exactly, but something behind his eyes had gone very, very still. "She was the only one who actually helped me," he said. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that takes up more room than loud does. Vanessa's smile stayed in place through sheer muscle memory. "Of course, I just meant—" "I know what you meant." He looked at Vanessa for exactly 2 seconds, and then he looked back at Imani. And then he left. Vanessa turned to Imani with the smile still on her face, reorganized into something smaller and sharper. "Well," she said, "at least someone has a soft spot for charity cases." Destiny laughed. Kayla didn't, quite, but she looked at the floor rather than at Imani, which was its own kind of answer. Imani went back behind the counter. She picked up the returns log. She felt her hands were not entirely steady. He came back the next day. Not to buy anything. He walked in, looked around until he found her, and walked directly to the counter. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for what happened yesterday. That wasn't fair to you, and I didn't handle it well." Imani stared at him. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know, but I walked out and left you there, and I've been thinking about it." She studied his face for a moment. There was no angle in it, no performance. He looked like a man who had genuinely spent time thinking about someone else's discomfort and had felt bad about it, which in Imani's experience was not a thing men did particularly often, especially men who didn't have a reason to. "I'm fine," she said. And then, before she could stop herself, "It's not the first time." "I figured," he said quietly, "which is why I came back." She didn't know what to do with that. She had gotten very good, over 3 years, at handling cruelty and managing grace and threading the needle of professionalism through situations that would have made most people rage quit. But simple, direct human decency from a stranger? She was slightly less practiced at that. "I don't usually," she started, "have coffee with customers." He didn't smile exactly, but the corners of his eyes changed. "I'm not a customer anymore. I already bought my thing." "You bought a scarf." "Correct. So technically, I'm just a man who bought a scarf and would like to have coffee. If that's—" He stopped, started again. "No pressure. I just wanted to ask." Imani looked at him for a long moment. "I get off at 6, she said. The coffee was at a place 6 blocks away. Not trendy, not expensive. The kind of coffee shop that had been on the same corner for 20 years because the neighborhood actually used it. Roman ordered a black coffee. Imani ordered an oat milk latte and waited for him to register the price and say something about it, because she had dated men who did that, who had a way of making you feel the cost of your small pleasures, and he didn't. He asked about her. Not in the interview way, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" but in the way of someone who was actually paying attention to what she said and letting it lead to the next question. She found herself telling him about the returns log, about the commission errors, about the time she had memorized the entire spring inventory in a single weekend because she wanted to be indispensable, and then Vanessa had received the employee performance mention anyway. "Why do you stay?" he asked. Her mother's question, she answered the same way. "Because I'm good at it, and because one day it's going to matter." He nodded slowly. He didn't say "that sounds exhausting" or "have you thought about leaving" or any of the things people said when they heard a story like hers, and felt the need to offer a solution to something that wasn't asking for one. He just nodded and drank his coffee and said, "I believe you." 2 words. She had not expected them to land so hard. She asked about his daughter. He talked about her for 20 minutes with a careful, specific love. The way she refused to eat anything that touched another food on the plate. The way she had recently decided she wanted to be a marine biologist, despite never having seen the ocean. The way she had inherited his grandmother's stubborn streak, and he was both terrified and privately proud of it. By the time the coffee was done, Imani had not once thought about Vanessa. They saw each other again 5 days later. A Tuesday evening, a small neighborhood Vietnamese place that Roman said his daughter called the Noodle House because she couldn't pronounce the name. He brought her that night, his daughter, Maya, who had the scarf wrapped around the strap of her backpack in a way that was technically not what the scarf was for, but was absolutely correct for a 7-year-old. Maya studied Imani across the table for approximately 45 seconds with the focused seriousness that 7-year-olds bring to evaluation processes, and then said, "Your hair is really short. I like it." "Thank you," Imani said. "Your scarf is really cool." "It's emerald," Maya said. "My dad says that's a kind of green, but it's a better green." "He's right," Imani said. Maya nodded, satisfied, and went back to her menu. Roman looked at Imani across the table, and the corners of his eyes did that thing again. Imani felt something shift in her chest, not the dramatic movie kind of shift, the quieter kind, the kind that feels like something that was braced for impact has very slowly begun to stop holding its breath. 3 weeks in, on a Saturday afternoon, Vanessa made her move. She had been watching. That was the thing about Vanessa. She watched. She had noticed that Imani was leaving work on time instead of staying late, that there was something different in the way she carried herself. Some small and difficult-to-name change in the angle of her chin. She waited until there were 6 other employees on the floor and 2 customers near the register. "Word is you've been seeing someone," Vanessa said, arranging a display of wallets with precise, unhurried movements. "That's sweet." The pause was exactly calibrated. "For someone like you." Imani was tagging inventory. She didn't look up. "I hope he's not expecting too much," Vanessa continued. "I mean, a man who's interested in a woman." Another pause. "At your stage of life, at your size. He's either genuinely unusual or he wants something." She tilted her head. "Which one do you think it is?" One of the customers near the register had heard. Imani could feel it. She put down the tag gun. She looked at Vanessa. "I think," Imani said, "that the reason you're so interested in my love life is because yours is giving you anxiety. And I hope that gets better for you. I genuinely do." Vanessa's expression flickered, just once. Then she laughed it off, that controlled social laugh, and went back to the wallets. But her hands, Imani noticed, had gone slightly still on the display. Imani told Roman about it that evening, not to vent, or not only to vent. She told him because she was trying to be honest with him about what her days actually looked like, because she had been in situations before where she let someone in on the highlight reel and then resented them later for not knowing about the rest of it. Roman listened. He was sitting on a park bench. They had taken Maya to a small park near his apartment, and Maya was 15 feet away interrogating a pigeon, and he had his hands loosely clasped, and he was listening in that complete unhurried way he had that Imani was still getting used to. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She's afraid of you," he said. Imani laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so far from how she experienced it. "She's not afraid of me. She has spent 3 years making my life miserable." "Those two things can both be true," Roman said. "Fear makes people ugly. Always has." Imani looked at him. "I know a little about people who are afraid of losing their position," he said carefully. "It makes them do things that look like cruelty, but are actually something smaller than that." It was the most he'd said about himself, about whatever his life actually looked like outside of Tuesday noodle houses and Saturday parks. And she heard it but didn't push. There was something about Roman that she had sensed from the beginning. He would tell her things in his own time, and pressing would close something rather than open it. She reached over and put her hand over his. He turned his palm up and held it. Across the grass, Maya had apparently made peace with the pigeon and was now trying to convince it to follow her. "She does this every time," Roman said. "Does it ever work?" "Not once." They sat there in the ordinary, improbable quiet of it, and Imani thought, "I don't know everything about this man, but I know that he showed up twice. I know that he listens. I know that he loves that little girl, like breathing." Whatever else there was, she thought, they could figure out. She had no way of knowing yet how much else there was. The proposal happened on a Wednesday night in November, and it was nothing like what Imani had grown up imagining a proposal would look like. There was no restaurant reservation, no violinist appearing from behind a curtain, no moment staged for someone else's camera. It was Roman's kitchen, which was small and slightly crowded with Maya's drawings taped to the refrigerator at various non-uniform angles, and they had just finished eating the pasta that Roman had overcooked by 6 minutes, and that Maya had declared was fine while eating 3 full servings of it. And Maya was now asleep on the couch under a fleece blanket with a cartoon sea turtle on it. Roman was washing a pot. Imani was drying it. This was not a thing they had discussed or assigned. It was just the thing that had happened, the way rhythms develop between people who have been spending enough time in the same spaces that they stop thinking about logistics and just move. He turned off the faucet. He was quiet for a moment in the way that Imani had learned meant he was organizing something, lining up words that mattered enough to get right. "I need to tell you something," he said. She put down the dish towel. Something in his tone made her pay full attention. First, he turned to face her. He reached into the pocket of his jeans, not a box, just a ring, held between his first finger and thumb, a simple band with a dark stone that caught the kitchen light in a way that made it look almost like the inside of something alive. "I want to ask you to marry me. And I need you to know that I'm asking before I say the other thing, because the other thing might change your answer, and I need you to know that the asking is real regardless." Imani stared at the ring. "Roman, I'm not perfect," he said, and the steadiness in his voice had a seam in it now, something underneath it that was working not to come through. "I'm not going to pretend I am. There are things about my life that I haven't told you fully, and I'm going to tell you tonight, all of it. But I want to ask you first because I need you to understand that this is not something I'm doing for any reason, except that you're the only person I have wanted to be honest with in a very long time, and I'm terrified of that, and I'm doing it anyway." Imani's chest was doing something complicated. "You could have asked me after," she said. "No," he said, "I couldn't. Because if I told you first, you'd spend the whole rest of it trying to figure out if the question was real or strategic. And it's real, Imani. It's the only thing I'm completely sure about right now." She looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She looked at Maya asleep on the couch with the sea turtle blanket, one sock half off her foot, her mouth slightly open. She thought about the park bench, the noodle house, the coffee shop where he'd said, "I believe you like it was the simplest thing in the world." "Yes," she said. He let out a breath that told her he hadn't been sure. He put the ring on her finger, and then he said, "Okay, now sit down." She sat at the kitchen table. He sat across from her and he talked for almost 2 hours. He did not make it sound cinematic. He did not frame it as a story with a beginning, middle, and moral. He talked the way people talk when they are trying to be truthful about something they are not proud of and not ashamed of in equal measure. In pieces, not in order, backtracking sometimes, sitting forward when certain parts came out and then settling back when they passed. The D'Angelo name, he told her, was not a name that needed introduction in most rooms in Chicago. His father had built an organization that operated in the spaces between things, between legitimate business and not, between the law and the arrangements that existed alongside it. Hotels, real estate, several high-end retail groups, and underneath those, in the older layers, the things that his father had built first and that Roman had spent the last 6 years trying to either legitimize or extract himself from, depending on the piece. He was not going to tell her it was clean. He was not going to tell her nobody had gotten hurt in the building of it. He was going to tell her the truth, which was that he had inherited something enormous and complicated, and that he had spent most of his adult life trying to decide what kind of man he wanted to be inside of it. Imani sat across from him and listened without interrupting. Her face went through things. She could feel it going through things. But she did not look away, and she did not stand up. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "The boutique," she said. He nodded before she completed the sentence. "Elise & Company is under Crescent Retail Holdings, which is one of mine." She absorbed that. "So my boss has no idea who I am. I haven't used my name in those operations in years. I go through layers of management." A pause. "I wanted to tell you that separately because I know what it sounds like. It sounds like you own the place where I work." "Yes. And you let me keep working there, while knowing that. I didn't think it was my decision to make for you." She looked at her hand. The ring sat on her finger, and it was real, and the stone was deep, and she had said yes 20 minutes ago, and there was a 7-year-old asleep on the couch who had decided 3 weeks in that Imani's hair was the right kind of short. "I'm angry," Imani said. "I know. I don't mean a little angry. I mean," she pressed her hands flat on the table, "I mean, you watched me. You watched me come home from that place and talk to you about the returns log and the commissionaires and Vanessa, and you knew the whole time that you had the power to— Yes, he said, and I made a choice not to use it because I didn't want to be that for you. I didn't want to be the man who fixed your job because he could. I wanted to be the man you chose before you knew I could. That's not your call. I know that too. She stood up. She walked to the window that looked out over the street below, the wet November pavement reflecting the streetlights in long orange lines. She stood there for a while. My whole life, she said, her voice lower now, speaking more to the window than to him. People have decided what I was worth before I had the chance to show them. My size, my clothes, my neighborhood, my skin. She stopped. I thought you were different because you saw me without all that. I did. But you were still keeping something huge. Yes. She turned around. I was still sitting at the table, his hands in front of him, not making any defensive gestures, not trying to manage the moment, just sitting in it. If you had told me the first week, she said, I would have left. I know. If you had told me the second week, I probably would have left. I know that too. Is that why you waited? He looked at her steadily. Partly. And partly because by the second week I was scared. And I haven't been scared of something in a very long time, Imani. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have something I didn't want to lose. She stood at the window for another long moment. Then she looked at her hand again. The ring. I said yes, she said. I'm not taking that back tonight. Okay. But we're not done talking about this. We're not done, he agreed. Not even close. She came back to the table. She sat down. She picked up his coffee cup, which had gone cold, and wrapped both hands around it anyway. Tell me about the gala, she said. The gala was 3 weeks out. An annual event, corporate, formal, attended by the legitimate face of everything the D'Angelo organization had built over 40 years. Hotels, retail, real estate, philanthropy. 500 people in a venue that cost more per night than most people made in a year. It was also, Roman told her quietly, the event where the organization presented its face to the city, where the relationships that mattered were consolidated, where the people who needed to understand the structure of power did so without anyone saying a word about it out loud. And you want me there, Imani said. I want to introduce you as my wife, in front of everyone. She studied him. Why? You could introduce me privately. You could do this in stages. Because in stages, you'll always be the woman I'm introducing. This way, you walk in as who you already are. He paused. I'm not going to make you a secret. I spent the last 6 years being afraid of people who wanted to use the people I loved against me. I'm not doing that anymore. Imani was quiet for a moment. And the other reason? He looked at her. What other reason? Roman. She said his name the way you say someone's name when you know them well enough to know when they're leaving something out. A long pause. There are people in that room who have been waiting to see whether I've weakened, whether what they think of as my personal life has made me, he searched for the word, manageable. I need them to understand that what I've built personally is not a vulnerability. It's the opposite. She let that sit. So I'm not only your wife at this thing, she said carefully, I'm also a statement. You're my wife, he said, and there was an edge to it now, something that pushed back. What I just described is what other people will interpret. I can't control interpretations. I can control what's true. And what's true is that I want you next to me. She believed him. She also heard the other thing underneath it and filed it away, because she was not a woman who ignored what she heard underneath things. I need a dress, she said finally. Something in Roman's posture shifted, the particular release of a man who has been bracing for a very different sentence. I know a place, he said. I'm sure you do. She stood up, refilled her own coffee from the pot that was also cold by now. I'm picking it myself. Of course. And I want to meet your people before the gala. Not a room full of 500, a few. The ones who matter. He nodded slowly. I can do that. Good. She came back to the table. She sat down. Now tell me about the rival faction thing you glossed over 20 minutes ago. He closed his eyes briefly, opened them. How do you do that? I've been listening to people not say things for 3 years, Imani said. I got very good at the gaps. The next day at the boutique was a Tuesday, which meant the morning was slow and the team was smaller, and Vanessa was in a particular kind of mood that Imani had learned to identify by the angle of her shoulders when she walked through the door. Something had happened with Preston. Imani didn't know what and didn't ask, but she recognized the signs. The tightness around Vanessa's jaw, the way she was putting things down slightly harder than necessary, the performance of composure that happened when composure was costing something. Imani kept her distance. She had enough to think about. The ring was on her right hand, not her left. She had moved it that morning not because she was hiding it, but because she was not ready, not yet, to answer questions she didn't have words for. The morning passed without incident. It was after lunch that things broke. A customer came in. A woman, mid-50s, black, impeccably dressed in the kind of quiet way that cost considerably more than the loud way. She was looking for something for a dinner event. She had a full figure, and she carried it with the particular authority of someone who had stopped apologizing for herself at some specific moment in the past and never looked back. Imani approached her immediately. They had a good conversation. The woman knew what she wanted and also knew how to be talked to, and within 15 minutes, Imani had pulled 3 options that she thought actually worked, not 3 options that were technically in the right size category. The woman was in the fitting room. Imani was at the rail pulling a 4th option she thought might be interesting when Vanessa appeared behind her. "She's mine," Vanessa said quietly. Just those 2 words. Imani turned. "Excuse me? I was going to approach her when she came in. You cut me off." "I didn't cut you off, Vanessa. You were in the back." "Because I was getting something for another client." The whisper had a hiss in it now. "She's a high-value customer, I can tell, and I need this commission." "You need—" Imani stopped herself, lowered her voice further. "I am already with her. She is already in the fitting room with my selections." "Switch out. Tell her another associate will be assisting." "I'm not doing that." Vanessa's eyes went very flat. It was a specific look, not the sharp social cruelty she performed for an audience, but something more fundamental, stripped of performance. "I'm telling you something plainly, Imani. I need that commission. Preston and I are having a... This month is difficult. I need this." And here was the thing about Imani Brooks that nobody at Elise & Co. had ever fully understood. Her patience was not inexhaustible. It was structural, built into her because the alternative, in an environment like this one, would have cost her the job, the income, the daily discipline of being better than the situation required. But structural things have load limits. "I'm sorry you're having a hard month," Imani said. "Genuinely. But I'm with this customer. And no." She walked back to the fitting room. She heard Vanessa behind her, not following, but standing there. And in the quality of that stillness, there was something new. Not just anger, something that was recalibrating. The woman bought 2 of the 3 options Imani had pulled. The commission was significant. Imani logged it under her own name and felt no satisfaction about it, and also no guilt. Vanessa didn't say anything else to her that day. Which was worse. Roman's inner circle, when Imani finally met them, was smaller than she'd expected and considerably less theatrical. There was a man named Carver, who was Roman's second, short, precise, with the kind of stillness that came from being the person who handled things when Roman wasn't in the room, which was to say, he handled things constantly. There was a woman named Greta, who was Roman's attorney and who also managed several of the legitimate companies at the corporate level, and who looked at Imani for the first 3 minutes with a neutral expression that gave nothing away, and then, at some point during the second drink, appeared to make a private decision and shifted into something that was almost warmth. And there was Marco, who was Roman's cousin, and who was the first person to shake Imani's hand and say, "He's been different since he met you. I thought you should know that immediately," with the cheerful indifference of someone who did not particularly care whether the information was welcome. They were in a private room in the back of a restaurant that was publicly known as one of Roman's legitimate holdings, and privately known as the place where his closest people could speak without architecture. Imani sat through dinner and listened more than she talked, which was a skill she had developed at the boutique and which served entirely different purposes here. She asked Carver about the retail division, specifically about Crescent Holdings and how the oversight structure worked. Carver looked at Roman before answering. Roman nodded once. Carver told her. She asked Greta about the legitimization effort, not in those words, but in the words Greta would have used herself, the words about restructuring and diversification and long-term transition. Greta gave her a look that recalibrated a second time and then answered with more detail than she had clearly planned to. On the drive home, Roman was quiet for a while. "Carver likes you," he said finally. "Carver doesn't like anyone," Imani said. He was evaluating me." "Yes, and he likes you. How can you tell?" "He answered your questions." Imani considered this. "What about Greta?" "Greta thinks you're dangerous." "Is that good?" "From Greta, it's the highest compliment she gives." Imani looked out the window at the city moving past. She was still processing everything: the dinner, the room, the weight of what she had walked into. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something more like the feeling of standing at the edge of something vast and understanding, for the first time, the actual dimensions of it. "The gala invitation," she said. "What about it?" "Vanessa's boyfriend, Preston Hale. He's been telling people he has business connections across Chicago. Has your name come up in his circles?" Roman was quiet for a beat longer than usual. "Carver flagged a Preston Hale 2 weeks ago. He's been representing himself as having relationships with certain of my legitimate companies, trying to leverage the name without any actual access." Imani turned to look at him. And we're looking into it. He's going to be at the gala, Roman. Vanessa said he received an invitation." "I know." His jaw tightened slightly. "We know exactly how that invitation was obtained." She watched his profile in the passing streetlights. "What did he do?" "Enough," Roman said quietly. "He did enough." The dress arrived 4 days before the gala. Imani had worked with a designer that Greta had recommended, a woman named Celeste, who operated out of a studio in Bronzeville and who did not make clothes that apologized. The gown was deep burgundy, structured at the waist, with a neckline that was neither aggressive nor timid, and a train that moved when Imani moved rather than the other way around. Celeste had taken her measurements with the professionalism of someone who understood that a body was a body and a garment's job was to work with it, and the result was something that had taken 4 fittings and felt, when Imani put it on the final time, like it had been assembled around her specifically and could not have existed otherwise. She stood in front of the mirror in Celeste's studio and did not say anything for a moment. "Well?" Celeste said from behind her. "It's right," Imani said. "Yes," Celeste agreed. "It is." The night before the gala, Vanessa called a meeting of the floor staff. It wasn't unusual. Pre-event coordination happened sometimes when the boutique had a connection to a larger event, and the D'Angelo gala had contracted Elise and Kobotish for several corporate gift arrangements, which meant some staff would be handling deliveries. Vanessa had positioned herself as the coordinator for this, which the manager had approved without much examination. At the meeting, Vanessa distributed materials, schedules, delivery assignments, a list of protocols for interacting with the event's security staff, and then she slid a laminated badge across the break room table toward Imani. "I got you a service credential," she said, her voice perfectly measured, carrying just enough for the room to hear. "For the gala. I know you mentioned you might be attending, and I thought, just in case things didn't work out with your +1 situation, at least this way you'd still be in the building." She smiled with all the structural integrity of a building that had been quietly demolishing itself for years. "I mean, they might let you in through the back door." The room laughed. Not all of it. Destiny laughed, and 2 of the part-time girls laughed, and the assistant manager made a sound that was adjacent to laughter. But the laughter was there, and it filled the break room, and Imani felt it hit her in the sternum the way it always did despite 3 years of practice absorbing it. She looked at the laminated badge. She picked it up. She put it in her jacket pocket. "Thank you, Vanessa," she said, and her voice was so even that the laughter in the room went slightly uncertain, the way laughter does when the target doesn't perform the expected response. She stood up. She said she had a delivery to verify. She left the break room. She stood in the corridor outside for exactly 30 seconds, her back against the wall, her eyes closed, her jaw so tight she could feel the pressure in her temples. 30 seconds, no more. Then she opened her eyes. She took her phone out. She sent a text to Roman. "She gave me a service worker pass for your gala. Said I could use the back door." The response came back in under a minute. "Who else was in the room?" She told him. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "Okay. I'm handling something. I'll call you tonight." She stared at the message. Read the specific flatness of "I'm handling something" and felt, for the first time, what it actually meant to be married to a man whose way of handling things operated on a scale she was still learning the dimensions of. She put her phone away. She went back to work. She smiled at customers and helped a woman find a birthday gift for her sister, and processed 2 returns without error, and did not let a single thing she was feeling reach the surface of her face, because she had been practicing that particular discipline for 3 years, and she was, whatever else was true, very good at it. That night, Roman called as promised. His voice had a quality to it she had not heard before. Not cold exactly, but compressed. The way a voice sounds when the person using it has made a decision, and the decision is done, and what remains is just the implementation. Preston Hale, he said without preamble, has been using documents he obtained fraudulently to represent himself as a partner in 2 of my legitimate operations. He's been leveraging that representation to access credit and to bring in investors who believe they are investing in D'Angelo-backed ventures. Imani was sitting on the edge of her bed. How much? Enough to matter. Enough that there are federal considerations. A pause. Our legal team has been coordinating with authorities for the past week. What happens at the gala tomorrow night is not going to be a surprise to anyone except Preston and apparently Vanessa. Imani absorbed this. You knew this was coming, she said, when I told you he was going to be there. We knew something was coming, the timeline accelerated. Because of what Vanessa did today? Because I texted you? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm it. The service credential she distributed. It's a credentialing format that shouldn't exist outside our security system. The design is proprietary to the gala's access management, which means Preston had access to our proprietary security materials. Another pause. Which means his access to our systems went further than we thought. Imani was very still. So tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, yes. Everything comes out tomorrow. She looked at the dress hanging on the back of her closet door. The burgundy. The train that moved when she moved. Are we safe? She asked. At the event? Is it going to be safe? A pause that lasted 1 beat too long. I'm going to have additional security in place. My team is the best in the city. But I want you to know everything going in, Imani. I'm not hiding anything from you. Not anymore. She heard the weight of that last sentence. The not anymore. The acknowledgement of the before. Okay, she said. Okay? I said, okay, Roman. I'll be there. She looked at the dress again. But I need you to understand something. Tell me. I'm not going as a statement. I'm not going as a symbol of something. I'm going as your wife. And if something goes wrong in that building tomorrow, I am not going to stand in a corner and wait for someone to escort me to safety. She felt something in her chest that was not quite fear and not quite readiness, but lived in the exact territory between them. I need you to understand that about me. The line was quiet. Then Roman said, I understood that about you the first week. She almost said something in response to that. Instead, she said goodnight, and she put the phone on the nightstand, and she sat in the silence of her apartment with the ring on her left hand now. She had moved it back that afternoon, quietly, without announcement, and she thought about what it meant to walk into a room where everything was going to change. She had spent 3 years walking into a room where everything stayed the same, no matter what she did. Tomorrow was the last time she would ever do that. She lay back on the bed without turning off the light, and she stared at the ceiling, and the dress hung on the door and caught the lamplight at its edge. And outside, the Chicago night pressed against the windows with all of its cold and ordinary indifference, and Imani Brooks, who had picked up every laminated badge and every redirected commission and every calibrated laugh and filed them somewhere inside herself that nobody had ever seen, lay there and felt the specific, terrifying, irreversible weight of a door that had already begun to open. The morning of the gala arrived the way significant mornings often do, without ceremony, without any atmospheric signal that today was different from any other day. The light through Imani's windows was the same pale gray-white of every November morning in Chicago. The radiator knocked twice and then settled. The coffee maker finished its cycle with the same small exhalation it always made. Imani sat at her kitchen table in her robe with both hands around her mug and did not drink from it for a long time. She was thinking about Maya. Specifically, she was thinking about what Roman had told her 3 nights ago. That Maya knew something important was happening tonight but did not know the full shape of it, that she would be staying with Greta's family in a house that had the kind of security that didn't announce itself but was absolutely present. Roman had told Imani this with the practiced neutrality of a man who had been making these kinds of arrangements for years, who had long ago learned to talk about the protection of his child without letting his voice carry what that necessity actually cost him. Imani had heard the cost anyway. She had gotten very good at hearing what Roman's voice did not say. She drank her coffee. She showered. She sat in front of the mirror in her bedroom and did her makeup with the slow, deliberate precision of someone who understood that tonight she would be looked at by 500 people who had formed their opinion of her before she walked into the room, and that the only thing she could control was what they saw when she arrived. She did not rush. Rushing was for people who were afraid of the silence. At 4 in the afternoon, her phone rang. It was Roman. "Carver needs to brief you," he said without greeting. "There's been a development." The word development in Roman's vocabulary, Imani had learned, meant something had changed in a way that required recalibration. It did not mean everything was fine, and also let me tell you some additional pleasant information. "Tell me now," she said. "Not on the phone. Carver is 10 minutes away." She was dressed and at the door before 8 minutes had passed. Carver came in with a tablet and a specific expression that Imani was beginning to recognize as his version of controlled urgency. Everything about his posture said he had seen worse than this, and everything about his pace said they did not have the kind of time that allowed for being cavalier about it. He sat at her kitchen table. She sat across from him. He pulled up something on the tablet and turned it to face her. It was a photograph. Surveillance quality, taken at distance, but clear enough. A parking structure. 2 men standing between 2 cars. One of them was Preston Hale. She recognized him from the photos Vanessa had shown around the boutique, the carefully staged restaurant shots, and the car selfies. All of it constructed to project an affluence that was, apparently, constructed as well. The other man she did not recognize. He was older, heavy through the shoulders, wearing a coat that was too warm for the weather in the way that men wore coats when they were carrying things they didn't want visible. "Who is that?" Imani said. "His name is Victor Solis," Carver said. "He runs an operation on the west side. He and Roman's father had an arrangement going back 20 years. That arrangement ended badly. Victor has been looking for leverage over the D'Angelo organization ever since." Imani looked at the photograph. "What kind of leverage?" "The kind you create by putting someone on the inside." Carver took the tablet back. "Preston Hale has been Victor Solis's man for the past 18 months. The financial fraud, the false credentials, the investor scheme. Those were real, and they're being handled. But they were also cover. The actual objective was access to the gala's security architecture." Imani was very still. "The credentials," she said. "The proprietary format. The service pass Vanessa gave me." Carver looked at her with something that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to respect. "Correct. Preston obtained a security template from our system. We initially thought it was for the investor fraud, to make his credentials look legitimate. But the template he took was specifically the access tier architecture for the gala venue. Staff corridors, service entrances, security rotation schedules." Imani set down her coffee cup, carefully. "He's not planning to be arrested at the gala." "No," Carver said. "He's planning to not be the only one who has a bad night." The kitchen was very quiet. "Victor's people," Imani said. "We believe 3 to 5 individuals, using service credentials based on the stolen template, have already been issued passes for the event under contracted vendor identities." "Catering. AV. Facilities." Carver's voice had the specific flatness of someone delivering information that is frightening and must be delivered anyway. "They will be in the building before the first guest arrives." Imani looked at her hands on the table. The ring caught the light. "Roman knows this?" "Roman has known for the past 2 hours. He's currently with his security team restructuring the night's protocols." A pause. "He wanted you briefed personally. He said—" Carver stopped. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. "He said you had the right to decide whether you still wanted to be there tonight, knowing what you know now." She looked at Carver for a moment. "And what do you think I should decide?" she said. Carver was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "I think," he said carefully, "that Roman has spent 6 years in situations where the people around him made choices based on what was safest for themselves. I think that has cost him." He picked up the tablet. I also think that the venue's service corridor layout is something our security team is working from blueprints on, and that blueprints and physical knowledge are different things. He paused. You mentioned to Roman that you had worked retail events in that building. Imani looked at him. I worked 3 corporate events in that venue, she said slowly. Over 2 years. The service corridors in the East Wing connect to the loading dock and come out 2 blocks over. There's a secondary stairwell in the north section that isn't on the public floor plan. It was a renovation addition, 5 years ago. Most event staff don't know it exists. Carver did not write anything down. He didn't need to. Roman said you knew the building. Roman listens, Imani said. Carver stood up. He straightened his jacket. The car will be here at 7:15, he said. Whatever you decide, it will be the right decision. She looked at him. That's not something you actually believe. He almost smiled. It was the closest she had seen him come to it. No, he said. But it's something I was asked to say. He let himself out. Imani sat at the table for a long time after the door closed. Then she stood up. She went to the bedroom. She put on the dress. The venue was called the Meridian, and it sat on the lakefront with the specific architectural confidence of a building that had been designed to make people feel small before they walked in. 20-foot ceilings in the entrance hall, black marble floors that reflected the chandelier light in shifting patterns. A ballroom on the second level that could hold 600 and tonight held 500, all of them moving through the kind of social choreography that looked effortless and was, in fact, exhaustive professional work. Imani arrived in the third car of Roman's motorcade, which was a sentence she was still adjusting to. The entrance was a private one, a side access point that bypassed the main arrival line, used by the people who did not need to be seen arriving to establish that they were there. Roman was at her side, and he was wearing a black suit that fit the way clothes fit on men who had been dressing for authority since their 20s, and his hand was at the small of her back, and the security personnel at the door did not check credentials. They simply opened it. Imani walked in and felt the temperature change, not physically, but socially. The specific pressure of a room that knew something had arrived. She had been in rooms where people looked at her and calculated her worth in the first 3 seconds and found it insufficient. She had experience with that particular variety of being looked at. This was different. This room was looking at her and calculating. She could feel it happening in real time, the rapid processing. And the calculation was being interrupted, rerouted, forced to revise itself, because the answer it kept arriving at didn't match the expectation it had walked in with. Roman kept his hand at her back and did not hurry. They moved through the outer reception. Men in tailored suits acknowledged Roman with the specific economy of men who understood that elaborate deference was its own kind of weakness. A nod, sometimes a word, occasionally a hand extended. Women in formal gowns whose prices Imani could now, with her current knowledge of his holdings, estimate with uncomfortable accuracy. Everyone recalibrating, everyone adjusting their face to accommodate a woman none of them had been briefed on. Imani kept her chin level and her expression open and her pace steady and did not perform anything. She was not performing. That was the thing. She had spent 3 years performing composure in an environment that required her to be less than she was. Tonight she was simply standing in what she was, and the room didn't know what to do with the absence of apology in it. They were 20 minutes into the reception when Imani saw Vanessa. She registered her before Vanessa registered her, which gave her the small tactical advantage of watching Vanessa's arrival unfold without her own reaction being visible. Vanessa came in through the main entrance with Preston at her elbow, and she was dressed beautifully. She had genuine taste, Imani had always acknowledged that privately, in a champagne column gown that worked for her body and her coloring, and that she had almost certainly purchased or borrowed based on what tonight was supposed to mean for her. Preston was in a tuxedo. He was laughing at something someone near the entrance had said. He had the easy, loud confidence of a man who had not yet received information that was going to end him, and there was something about that confidence, the scale of its unawareness, that turned Imani's stomach slightly. Then Vanessa looked across the room. It was the kind of involuntary scan people do in crowded spaces, the eyes moving to assess the room, identify the known faces, locate the power. Standard social navigation. Vanessa did it automatically. And then her eyes landed on Imani. Imani watched it happen, watched the scan stop, watched Vanessa's brain work, The rapid, visible sequence of recognition, disorientation, recalculation, the champagne gown, the entrance they had used, the hand at her back, the people around them. Vanessa's face did something complicated in the space of about 2 seconds, and then it went very, very still. Preston was still talking to someone. He hadn't looked up. Imani held Vanessa's gaze for a moment. Not as a challenge, not with any particular expression, just steadily. The way you look at something you have already made your peace with. Then she turned back to the conversation Roman was having with a man from one of his hotel holdings, and she listened, and she did not look at Vanessa again. 45 minutes into the reception, Carver materialized at Roman's shoulder. It was subtle, the kind of appearance that looked like someone simply walking by, but was, Imani now understood, a precisely timed approach that communicated something in the language that Roman and Carver had developed over years. Roman excused himself from the conversation with a touch to Imani's arm that said, "Stay," without saying it. She stayed. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server, and she stood in the company of a woman named Helene, who ran Roman's hotel division and who had the specific social skill of making every person she spoke to feel like the most intelligently observed person in the room. And she talked to Helene about customer experience in the hospitality sector, and felt the conversation open up in a way that surprised her with its genuine interest. But she was also watching. She watched Roman and Carver exchange something in low voices near the far wall. She watched Roman's jaw set. She watched Carver's eyes move to the service corridor entrance at the north end of the ballroom. She clocked the service corridor entrance because she knew the building. She counted the staff she could see operating in the room against the number that the event's contracted vendors would typically deploy. She had worked enough corporate events to know the ratio. The number was 2 or 3 above what it should be, maybe 4. She kept talking to Helene. Roman was back beside her within 4 minutes. His hand found her back again. "They're already in," he said under the cover of the room's ambient noise, his voice barely above the level of the music. "2 confirmed. Carver thinks 4 total. Service uniforms." "North corridor," Imani said. He looked at her. "3rd door past the catering station," she said. "The renovation stairwell. If they know the building, they don't know the building like you do." His jaw was tight. "We have 6 people in this room and another 12 outside, but they're positioned based on the old floor plan." He paused. "Carver is repositioning. It's going to take 8 minutes. 8 minutes at an event like this, with the room at full density and the energy already beginning to carry the specific anticipation of the formal program, which was when Roman was scheduled to take the stage, was a particular kind of forever. "Where is Maya?" Imani said. "With Greta. In a vehicle. Not in this building." His voice had something in it when he said this that was the closest she had ever heard him come to exposed. Just for a second. Then it was gone. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "Keep moving," she said. "Act normal. Don't change your pace. If they're watching, a change in pace tells them something shifted." He looked at her again. "I worked retail events for 2 years," she said. "You read A Room to Survive." Roman nodded once. They moved. The formal program was scheduled to begin at 9. At 8:40, the guests began moving toward the ballroom's main seating area. The drift of 500 people creating a flow that was difficult to move against and easy to move within if you knew how to use it. Imani used it. She moved with Roman toward the stage side of the room, and in the process, she covered the ground between the reception floor and the north corridor entrance, and she did it in the natural current of the crowd so that nobody watching from a service position would register her movement as deliberate. She had done this, moved through a space without looking like she had a destination, for 3 years. She was very good at it. She clocked the door. A man in a catering uniform was standing approximately 4 feet from it, slightly off the traffic pattern, holding a tray that had nothing on it. That was wrong. Servers held trays with things on them, or trays they were clearing. They did not hold empty trays and stand in off-pattern positions near structural entrances. That was the single most visible tell of someone who was pretending to belong in a space. She kept her eyes moving, did not stop, did not signal. She touched Roman's arm, a casual, social touch, the kind a wife makes at a public event, and she pressed twice with her fingers in a pattern that she had asked him to teach her 3 days ago after the briefing with Carver, because she had said, "If I need to communicate something in a room without using words, what do you use?" He had taught her 4 signals. She used the second one now. North entrance. 1 visible. She felt his arm change almost imperceptibly under her hand. Not a flinch, just a compression, a gathering of something. He turned toward the man at the stage platform and said something to him in the low, unhurried voice of a host, making program adjustments, and the man nodded and moved. And what had actually been communicated was nothing the catering uniform figure near the north corridor would have been able to read from 15 feet away. At 8:52, things broke. Not the way action breaks in films, with a single loud inciting event that everyone registers simultaneously. It broke the way real things break, unevenly, in pieces, starting in one corner and radiating. A sound from the north corridor, not loud, more like a door hitting something it shouldn't, a contained impact, made 2 of the guests nearest to it turn and look. Just turn and look. That was all. But it was enough to create a ripple in the ambient pattern of the room, and that ripple was enough for Imani to understand that Carver's repositioning had made contact. Roman moved, not running, walking with authority, which is a different thing. His security team, distributed through the room in the civilian clothes of other guests, began converging on the north section in the unhurried way that Roman's people did things. Efficiently, without the display that attracted attention and caused the civilian panic that made containment exponentially harder. Imani moved, not toward the exit, not toward the center of the room where most of the guests were now clustered in the instinctive herd response to social disruption. She moved toward the east wall, toward the service entrance that connected to the corridor she knew, because she had been in the east wing of this building twice during event load-in, and she knew the secondary route, and she was thinking about the families and the older guests and the women in heels who had no idea which way was out and who were going to be standing in the middle of a ballroom if this escalated to visible chaos. She pushed through the service door. The corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit, the deliberate institutional contrast to the designed ambience of the public spaces. She moved fast now, her heels hitting the concrete floor and making more noise than she wanted but less than she expected because the dresses train was in her left hand, lifted, and she had the practical reflexes of someone who had spent 3 years moving through service corridors in nice clothes during boutique delivery events. She found who she was looking for in the secondary staging area outside the East Ballroom entrance, a cluster of 8 people, guests who had been directed out of the ballroom's north side by a security team member, and who were standing in the corridor with the specific helpless bewilderment of people who were dressed for an event and were suddenly in a place that had nothing to do with the event. 2 women in their 60s, one of them missing a shoe somehow. A man in his 70s who was breathing harder than he should be. 3 couples, all of them looking at each other for information that none of them had. And standing in the corner, back against the wall, arms wrapped around herself, was a child. Not Maya. Maya was with Greta, in a vehicle, not in this building. Roman had said it, and she had believed it. This was a girl of about 10 or 11, in a dress that said she was someone's daughter at an important event, with the stunned, carefully controlled expression of a child who was trying not to cry in front of adults. Imani went to her first. She crouched in front of her, which meant the dress hit the corridor floor, and she didn't think about it. "What's your name?" "Sophie," the girl said. "Sophie. Where are your parents?" "They went to find—" There was a loud noise, and my dad said, "Stay here," and they went to— She stopped. Her jaw was working. "Okay. Sophie, I need you to do one thing for me. Can you hold my hand for right now?" Sophie grabbed her hand with both of hers and held it with the specific ferocity of a child who had been told to be brave and was deciding that holding on to something was close enough. Imani stood. She looked at the adults in the corridor. The man in his 70s was leaning against the wall, his color not right. "Sir," she said, "are you on any heart medications?" He looked at her with the slightly affronted expression of an older man being asked about his health by a woman he didn't know. "Aspirin, and something for blood pressure. Why?" "Because we're going to get you moving, and I want to know before we do." She looked at the group. "There is a stairwell at the end of this corridor. North turn, 30 feet, door on the right. It comes out at street level 2 blocks over. My name is Imani D'Angelo, and I know this building. I need everyone to come with me now. Not fast, not panicked, just walking. Can everyone walk?" The man in his 70s pushed himself off the wall. "I can walk," he said, with the dignity of someone who was not going to let a woman in a formal gown demonstrate more composure than him. Good, Imani said. Then let's go. Sophie did not let go of her hand. She got them out. The stairwell was where she said it was, the exit was where she knew it was, and the street on the other side was cold and ordinary and had nothing to do with whatever was happening inside the Meridian. And when the man in his 70s stepped out onto the pavement and took a full breath of November air, Imani felt something that was not pride exactly, but was adjacent to it in the way certain things are adjacent to the feelings you'd expect. She handed Sophie to a security team member who had been directed to the external perimeter, a woman in a dark coat who took one look at the situation and immediately addressed Sophie directly, which was the right instinct, and Imani registered that and filed it and let go of Sophie's hand. Sophie held on for one extra second, then she let go. Roman found her 11 minutes later. She was standing on the pavement outside the east exit, her dress touching the ground, her heels on the November concrete, watching the security team work the perimeter. Inside, she could hear from the occasional radio crackle and the footsteps overhead that it was contained. Not resolved, but contained. The specific difference between a situation that had stopped escalating and a situation that had been fully secured. Roman came through the door and looked at her and did a rapid full assessment, eyes, hands, posture, that took about a second and a half and told him what he needed to know. You got people out, he said. 8 guests and a girl named Sophie. She paused. The man in his 70s should be checked by whoever you have medically on site. His color was off. Roman already had his phone out, already relaying this, and the economy of that, the fact that he heard her, acted on it, no delay, no mediation, hit her somewhere she wasn't fully prepared for. Victor's people? She said. 4 of them. 2 contained inside, 2 intercepted in the north stairwell by Carver's team. His voice was flat. Nobody. He stopped. No guests were hurt. The pause before nobody was the pause of someone who was not going to tell her the complete version of what had happened in the north stairwell, and she heard that and chose, for this moment, not to press on it. Preston, she said, in the custody of the authorities who have been coordinating with our legal team for the past week. A pause. He tried to leave through the main entrance when the first sounds came from the corridor, walked directly into a waiting situation. Vanessa, Imani said. Roman looked at her. Where is Vanessa? He looked at her for a moment. Inside, he said. In the ballroom. He paused. She watched Preston get taken. She's been standing in the same spot for about 15 minutes. Imani looked at the door. She thought about 3 years of laminated badges and redirected commissions and calibrated laughs. She thought about the break room and the service credential, and at least this way they might let you through the back door. She thought about all of it, the full accumulated weight of it, and she felt it, because she was not a person who was good at pretending she didn't feel things, only at managing when they surfaced. Then she thought about Sophie's hand, the ferocity of the grip. Can you hold my hand for right now? She turned to Roman. I need to go back inside, she said. He looked at her carefully. The threat is contained, but it's not fully… I know. She straightened the dress, lifted the train slightly. I need to go back inside and I need you to do the program. Whatever you are going to say tonight, say it. She met his eyes. We didn't get dressed up and come all this way to end the night in a parking corridor. Roman looked at her for a long moment. Then he almost smiled. That thing his eyes did. The stage, he said, is still set up. Then let's use it, Imani said. She walked back through the door in the corridor and into the ballroom, and the room, which had spent the last 18 minutes in the controlled anxiety of a disrupted event being professionally managed, turned toward the entrance as she came in, turned the way rooms turned toward something that has changed its nature, toward something that entered one way and is returning another. And Imani walked across the black marble floor toward the stage in a dress that moved with her and a ring that caught the chandelier light, and she did not look at Vanessa, who was standing exactly where Roman had said she was standing, alone, in the same spot, with the expression of someone who has watched the architecture of their own life come apart in public. Imani did not look at her, not because she was dismissing her, because the stage was in front of her, and Roman was 3 steps behind her, and 500 people were watching a woman they had been told nothing about. Walk into the center of the most important room in the D'Angelo organization's public life, as though she had always belonged there. Because she had. She had always belonged somewhere like this, and the only thing that had ever stood between her and it was the relentless, grinding, cumulative insistence of people who mistook her patience for her ceiling, people who saw a woman who kept picking up laminated badges and kept showing up and kept being better than the situation required and decided that this meant she had accepted their assessment of her worth. She had not. She had never accepted it. She had been storing something quietly and without announcement for 3 years, and tonight the storage was done. And what came next was not revenge and not vindication, and not any word that suggested she had needed their permission to become what she already was. Roman stepped past her and took the stage. The room went quiet. Imani stood at the edge of the stage, and the chandelier light found the burgundy of her dress, and she felt her heart, which had been doing something complicated for the past hour, go very, very still. He took the microphone. He looked out at 500 faces. And then he looked directly at her for just a moment, with the expression of a man who had spent 6 years building walls around everything that mattered, and had finally, at considerable cost, taken them down. "Before anything else tonight," Roman said into the microphone, and his voice carried through the ballroom with the quiet authority of a man who had never once needed volume to be heard. "I want to introduce my wife." The room held its breath. 500 people and the specific silence of a crowd that has been through something together and has not yet decided what it means. The ballroom smelled like candle wax and expensive perfume, and underneath that, faint but present, the particular metallic edge that tension leaves in enclosed spaces. Several of the chandeliers had been slightly dimmed during the containment period and not yet brought back to full, which gave the room an unintended intimacy. Everything softened at the edges, the stage, the brightest point. Roman stood at the microphone and looked at Imani, and Imani walked up the 3 steps to the stage. She did not hurry. The dress moved with her. Her heels were steady on the platform, even though the platform was slightly raised, and she had been standing in those heels on concrete floors for the past 40 minutes, and she could feel them. A specific burn across the ball of each foot that she simply noted and set aside. The way she set aside most things that were inconvenient but not catastrophic. She reached Roman's side. He did not take her hand in the way of a man presenting a possession. He simply stood beside her, shoulder aligned to shoulder, and the difference between those two things was everything. "Imani D'Angelo," Roman said into the microphone, "my wife, and the person who, approximately 30 minutes ago, got 8 of your colleagues safely out of this building while my security team was managing the North Corridor." He paused. "Let that land. I wanted you to know that before I said anything else tonight." The room did something then that Imani had not expected. It applauded. Not the polite social applause of a formal event, the kind that fills the required space and then stops at the culturally appropriate moment. Something fuller than that. The man in his 70s, who was seated near the front and whose color had improved considerably, started it, and it moved through the room in a wave that was entirely out of Imani's control and that hit her somewhere behind her sternum and made her jaw tighten in the way jaws tighten when the alternative is something a person has decided they will not do in front of 500 people. She nodded once. She did not perform gratitude. She simply received it, which was harder. Across the room, in the back left section of the ballroom, Vanessa had not moved. She was still in the same position she had occupied for the past 20 minutes, standing slightly apart from a small cluster of guests, her champagne gown catching the ambient light, her glass in her right hand at a level that suggested she had stopped drinking from it at some point and was now simply holding it because it gave her hands something to do. Her face was arranged in the expression of someone who was working very hard to appear like they were simply observing an event rather than watching their entire understanding of their life rearrange itself in front of them. Preston was gone. She had watched it happen. Had watched him walk toward the main entrance with that loud, easy confidence still operating, still performing, and then watched him walk into something that was the opposite of an exit. 2 men in dark suits, not Roman suits, a different kind, the kind with credentials attached. And Preston had turned and looked back into the room for 1 second before they moved him forward, and that 1 second, that single involuntary backward look, had told Vanessa everything about the foundation she had been standing on for 18 months. It was not a foundation. It had never been a foundation. It was a set design. She was standing in the rubble of it. She watched Roman introduce Imani. She watched the applause. She watched Imani stand on that stage in that dress. that specific, extraordinary dress that did not apologize for a single inch of the body it was built for. And something inside Vanessa did a thing that she did not have a clean name for. It was not straightforward shame, though shame was in it. It was not straightforward envy, though that was in it too. It was something more like the specific vertigo of a person who has spent years navigating by a compass that was pointing in the wrong direction and has just, without preparation, been shown true north. She took a sip of the glass she had stopped drinking from. The wine was warm by now. She drank it anyway. Roman spoke for 12 minutes. Imani stood beside him for the first 3, and then, at a slight inclination of his chin that was meant for her specifically, she stepped back to a position at the edge of the stage that was still visible but not center, which was not diminishment. It was Roman's understanding that being introduced and being displayed were different things, and that Imani was not a prop in a presentation. He talked about the organization, about its legitimate holdings and the direction of their expansion, about a transition that had been in progress for 6 years and was now, he said, with the particular weight of a man who meant what he was saying in the precise way he was saying it, accelerating. He talked about Crescent Retail Holdings, about Elise & Cohen, and the broader customer experience division that was being restructured. I've asked Imani to take on the leadership of that division, he said. If you know her, you already understand why. If you don't know her yet, you will. Somewhere in the ballroom, Imani heard a sound that was specific to Vanessa. A very small, very sharp inhalation that she recognized because she had spent 3 years within 15 feet of the woman and knew the acoustics of her shock. She did not look toward it. She kept her eyes forward and her breathing even, and she did not smile, because smiling at that moment would have been the wrong thing, and she knew the wrong thing from the right thing by instinct that had been built through years of choosing the right thing in situations where the wrong thing was considerably easier. Roman finished speaking. The applause was sustained. He descended the stage and Imani came down beside him, and the room began to move again. The particular movement of a crowd that is processing something and covering that processing with social motion. Carver appeared at Roman's shoulder within 90 seconds of him leaving the stage. Imani saw it happen and excused herself from the conversation she had been folded into. Helene from the hotel division, asking her something specific about the boutique's customer metrics. And she moved to where Roman and Carver were standing. She arrived in time to hear Carver say quietly, "Victor is asking for a meeting, tonight." Roman's jaw tightened. No. He's saying it's a conversation, not a confrontation. He's saying his people were not supposed to... Carver paused, with the expression of someone repeating words they find structurally dishonest. Escalate. 3 of his people were carrying weapons inside my event, Roman said, his voice at a level that required Imani to be within 4 feet of him to hear it clearly. Past my security. Past 500 civilians. That's not an escalation that happened by mistake. I know that. He knows that you know that. Carver's eyes moved briefly to Imani and then back to Roman. He's asking specifically for a brief meeting before he leaves the city. He says there's information about Preston Hale that he wants to give you directly. He says it's information that affects... Another pause. The family. The word family in that context, in that sentence, with that pause before it, was not a word about corporate lineage. Roman was very still. Imani said, "Where?" Both men looked at her. "Where is he asking to meet?" she said. Carver answered because she had asked, and he had learned to answer her. "There's a private lounge on the building's lower level. He's already there. He came in through the South Service entrance," Imani said. "I know. That's the one that doesn't route through the main security checkpoint." She looked at Roman. "He's been in the building the whole time." Roman's jaw was doing something particular that she now understood as the outward sign of an internal calculation being run at speed. He wasn't with the 4 who came in through the north. "No," Carver said. "He came in separately, earlier. He's been waiting." "For what?" Carver's expression was careful. "For the program to end. For Preston to be taken. For..." I think for the room to settle, and for Roman to hear his name in this specific context, and for the ask to come at a moment when refusing it looks like avoiding information about your family. It was the most Carver had ever editorialized. The fact that he was doing it now meant he thought it mattered enough. Roman turned to Imani. She said, "I'm coming with you." "No." "Roman." "Not this one," he said, and his voice had something in it that she had not heard before. Not authority, exactly, but something adjacent to it that was also adjacent to fear, the specific combination of the two that comes from someone who has calculated the acceptable risks in their life and is telling you clearly that you are not in that category. This is not a negotiation. I need you to stay in this room. She looked at him for a moment. 30 minutes, she said. If you're not back in this room in 30 minutes, I'm coming down. Imani. That's not a negotiation either, she said. He looked at her, then he nodded once. He and Carver moved toward the south stairwell. Imani counted the minutes by the movement of people around her. She went back to Helene and continued the conversation about customer metrics, and made herself pay attention to the substance of what was being said, because paying attention to something external was the most effective tool she had against the internal process of imagining what was happening one floor below her and whether the man she had married 6 weeks ago was making the decision she would want him to make, or the decision that 30-some years of operating in a particular world had trained him to default to. 12 minutes in, Helene said something that required Imani's opinion on the demographic research that Crescent's retail division had commissioned the previous quarter, and Imani gave her an answer that was specific and grounded enough that Helene paused and looked at her with the expression of someone reassessing upward, and Imani registered this and was grateful for the distraction and kept talking. 22 minutes. She excused herself from Helene. She positioned herself where she could see the south stairwell entrance. She held a glass of water she was not drinking, and she watched the door, and she was aware that her heartbeat had moved up slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the specific readiness that comes from being a person who has told themselves they will do something and is now approaching the moment of deciding whether they meant it. 28 minutes. The stairwell door opened. Roman came through it, Carver behind him. Roman's jacket was still on. His tie was still straight. There was nothing visibly wrong with him, and she read him from across the room in the way you read people you know well. Not their surface, but the architecture underneath it. And what she read was not injury or obvious distress, but something she had not seen on him before. He looked like a man who had been handed information that changed the shape of something he thought he understood. She crossed the room to him. "Tell me," she said, when she reached him. He looked at her. His eyes were doing the compression thing, the gathering, but underneath it there was something unguarded, and the fact that he wasn't hiding it from her registered as significant. "Victor didn't send those 4 men to confront me," Roman said. She waited. "They were here for Preston. Victor found out 2 weeks ago that Preston had been using our name to run a scheme that was large enough to attract federal attention, and that federal attention was going to splash back onto Victor's operations through the financial connection." Roman's voice was flat, but the flatness was working to contain something. "Victor wanted Preston before the authorities got him. My gala was where Preston was going to be." "Victor's men were here to take Preston," Imani said slowly, "not to confront you. The confrontation was incidental, a consequence of the security response, not the objective." She absorbed this. "Which means Victor didn't target your event. Victor targeted Preston, who happened to be at my event." A pause. "Which still put 500 civilians in proximity to 4 armed men, so the distinction is limited in its comfort. But it changes the calculation about what Victor's actual position is." "And what is his actual position?" she said. Roman looked at her for a long moment. "I want a truce." The words sat between them. "He's been wanting leverage over the D'Angelo organization for 12 years, she said. "He's had people inside your legitimate businesses. He built a scheme that nearly compromised your legal standing, and now he wants a truce. He says the scheme was Preston's independent operation, that Preston came to him for protection, not the other way around." "Do you believe him?" Another long pause. "I believe that Preston was ambitious enough to have done this without anyone's authorization, and I believe Victor is afraid of what federal exposure means for him." He looked across the room. "Victor is 63 years old, and he has a grandson in a private school on the North Shore, and he has been wanting out of certain things for several years. He doesn't have the infrastructure to absorb a federal investigation that connects to his name." "He wants out," Imani said. "He wants quiet, which requires me to want quiet too." She was quiet for a moment. "And do you?" Roman looked at her with the full weight of a question that had more layers than it appeared to have, and she met it without looking away. "I want what I told you I wanted," he said. The night I told you everything. I want to build something that doesn't require my daughter to grow up the way I did." His jaw tightened. Victor offering a truce helps that. I don't trust Victor, but I trust what he's afraid of, and what he's afraid of right now aligns with what I need. "So you're considering it," she said. "I'm considering it." She nodded. "Okay." He looked at her. "Okay?" "You heard me." She put her water glass on a passing server's tray. "But if Victor's grandson is in a private school on the North Shore, Victor has stakes. And men with stakes negotiate honestly more often than men who have nothing to lose." She looked at Roman. "You know that. That's why you went down there alone instead of sending Carver." Roman studied her face. "You've been thinking about this since Carver said family," she said. "Yes." "And you've already made the decision." The pause was exactly long enough to confirm it. "Then why are you telling me you're considering it?" she said. "Because I wanted to hear how you thought about it," he said. "Before I told you I'd already decided." She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "That's the second time you've asked something after you already knew the answer." "The first time worked out," he said. She almost laughed. It came out as something smaller than a laugh, but in the same family. It was 9:47 when Vanessa found her. The reception had moved into its second phase, dessert service, smaller clusters of conversation, the reduced formality of an event winding down. And Imani was standing near the east window with a view of the lake, which was black and enormous in the dark, the city light spreading along its edge like something attempting to contain it. She heard Vanessa before she saw her. The specific sound of those particular heels on marble, a rhythm she had been hearing for 3 years. She turned. Vanessa looked, reduced. There was no other word that fit. The dress was still beautiful, and the makeup was still intact, and the posture was still deployed, because Vanessa's body had been performing a certain role for so long that it continued to do so even when the person inside it was in pieces. But in the eyes, which were the one place where performance consistently failed, there was something that had been stripped of its usual armor. She stopped about 4 feet away. She did not say anything immediately. She looked at Imani with the expression of someone who has rehearsed a speech and has now arrived at the moment of delivering it, and found that the words have either deserted them or revealed themselves as insufficient. "Vanessa," Imani said, just her name, neutral. "I didn't know," Vanessa said. The sentence was so stripped down, so absent of its usual construction, that for a moment Imani simply registered the texture of it. No performance, no calibration. 4 words in a voice that was doing what Vanessa's eyes were doing, failing to maintain. "About Preston," Vanessa said. "I didn't know what he was doing. I need you to know that." Imani studied her face. She realized, trying to determine whether this was a performance, whether this was the next iteration of Vanessa's social intelligence, a pivot to vulnerability as a tactical position, now that the previous position was indefensible. She was looking for the seam. She wasn't entirely sure she found one. "How long were you with him?" Imani said. 14 months. "And in 14 months, I didn't ask questions," Vanessa said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she tightened her jaw against it. "Because the answers to questions would have cost me something. I knew something wasn't completely right. The money was too easy, the connections were too convenient. I knew, and I didn't want to know." She stopped. "That's not innocence. I know that's not innocence." Imani was quiet. "What I did to you," Vanessa said, and now the composure was genuinely failing, the seams of it visible under the strain. "At the boutique, the things I said, the pass I gave you tonight." She stopped, looked at the floor for a moment. When she looked back up, her eyes were bright, but she was refusing, with the will of a woman who had spent years performing, to let them spill in public. "I need to say this regardless of what it costs me, because I am standing in your husband's building wearing your husband's event, and I gave you a service worker credential to humiliate you 6 hours ago, and you went into a crisis situation tonight and got people out, and I stood in the middle of this room and didn't know which way to go." A long pause. "I am sorry," Vanessa said, "for 3 years of it, all of it." The room continued to move around them. Dessert plates circulated. Somewhere across the ballroom, a man laughed at something, and the sound carried and dissipated. Imani looked at Vanessa for a long moment. She thought about what she could say. There was a version of this moment that she had, in the privacy of her own mind, sometimes imagined. Not planned for, but imagined. The way you sometimes imagine moments of vindication when you're sitting in your car after a bad shift. In those imagined versions, the language was sharp and exactly right, and it landed the way language lands when you've had time to construct it. She had not constructed anything. She had no speech ready, so she said the thing that was actually true. Respect isn't something you save for powerful people, Imani said. Vanessa looked at her. That's it? Imani said. That's all I've got for you right now. I'm not going to tell you we're fine. I'm not going to tell you it didn't matter. It did matter. 3 years of it mattered. She held Vanessa's gaze. But what I'm also not going to do is use tonight to finish you. That's not… She paused. That's not who I'm trying to be. Vanessa absorbed this. Her jaw worked. Then she nodded, once, and stepped back, and turned, and walked away across the marble floor. And her posture was still deployed, and her heels were still precise. And only someone who had spent 3 years within 15 feet of her would have been able to see, in the set of her shoulders, what the walk back across that room was actually costing her. Roman found Imani at the window 3 minutes later. He stood beside her and looked at the lake. I saw that, he said. I know. You could have destroyed her. I know. They stood together in the quiet for a moment. Are you all right? He said. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because it was not a social question, not from him, not in this moment. I'm tired, she said. I'm more tired than I've been in a long time. And I think tomorrow is going to be complicated, and the day after that is going to be complicated, and there is going to be a lot to figure out. She looked at the lake. But right now, in this specific minute, yeah, I'm all right. Roman put his hand at the small of her back, the same place he'd put it when they walked in, and they stood at the window and looked at the water. Behind them, the room was moving. People departing, conversations concluding, the organized dispersal of a formal event reaching its end. The chandeliers were back at full brightness now, whatever had dimmed them during the containment period corrected, the room restored to the version of itself it had been designed to present. Imani was aware of all of it, the room, the dispersal, the weight of the evening, the weight of everything before it, and everything that came next. She was also aware of Roman's hand at her back, and the view of the lake, and the specific, improbable quiet of this small window of stillness between the thing that had just happened and the things that were coming. She had earned this minute. She was going to stand in it for exactly as long as it lasted. Then from across the room, a sound, not from the north corridor, not from any security position, but from the entrance to the lower level, where the private lounge was located, where Victor Solis had been waiting, and where, according to the last update Carver had relayed, 2 of Roman's legal team had been managing the conclusion of a conversation that was supposed to have ended 40 minutes ago. Carver was already moving. Roman's hand at her back shifted. Imani turned from the window. The stillness was over, and whatever was coming through that door was going to require every version of herself she had been building toward. The woman behind the boutique counter who picked up every badge and stayed anyway. The woman in the corridor who kept her voice steady and got 8 people out. The woman on that stage in that dress who had looked at 500 faces and not. The door from the lower level opened, and it was not Victor. It was one of Roman's legal team, a young man named Davis who had been part of the coordination with the federal authorities and who had the specific pallor of someone who had just absorbed information that exceeded the parameters of his preparation. He crossed the ballroom floor toward Carver with the controlled urgency that Roman's people had trained into them. No running, no visible alarm, but a pace that communicated everything to anyone who knew how to read it. Carver read it immediately. He intercepted Davis 6 feet before Davis reached Roman. Imani watched Carver's face as Davis spoke to him. She had learned Carver's face well enough in the past weeks to know that what it did in the next 4 seconds was not its normal range. Something moved through it. Not panic. Carver did not panic. But a rapid, fundamental recalculation of the kind that only happened when the information received was categorically different from what had been anticipated. Carver looked at Roman. Roman was already moving toward him. Imani followed. Victor is gone, Carver said, his voice at the level of a conversation between 3 people and nothing beyond. He left through the south exit approximately 11 minutes ago. Davis was managing the paperwork side of the legal handoff and didn't register the departure until… He's gone, Roman repeated. The two words were flat and contained and had enormous weight underneath them. His two associates as well. The car they arrived in left the lower parking structure. Davis checked his phone. 9 minutes ago. Roman stood very still. The kind of still that Imani had learned was not absence of motion, but presence of a very rapid internal process. The federal team, Roman said, was managing the Preston Hale transfer on the north side of the building, Carver said. They weren't positioned for Victor's exit. Were they ever going to be? Roman said. The question had an edge to it, not directed at Carver, directed at the situation, at the shape of the thing that was now revealing itself. Carver's expression said he was asking himself the same question. Victor came in with information he wanted to give you directly, Imani said. He asked for a meeting. You went down. You came back up. And then 11 minutes later he leaves. Yes, Roman said. What did he actually give you in that meeting? Roman looked at her. A proposition, terms for a truce, names of two people inside my legitimate operations who had been feeding him information over the past 3 years. Names he gave you voluntarily, Imani said. Yes. Which means you'd spend the next 48 hours verifying those names and managing those removals. She held Roman's gaze. While Victor is in a car somewhere outside this building. The room continued its dispersal around them. Guests departing, staff clearing tables, the chandeliers bright and indifferent above all of it. Carver said carefully, the names he gave you. If they're real, Roman said. That's the thing. I ran them in my head while I was coming up the stairs. Both names fit. Both of them had access that explained certain things I've been trying to account for over a year. He looked at the window, at the lake. Victor gave me real information, which is why it works. Imani said, he gave you two problems that will occupy your attention and your organization's attention for the next several days, during which time he is wherever he is going and is no longer positioned for federal exposure because the primary federal interest tonight is Preston Hale, who is already in custody, and Victor's connection to Preston was through Preston's independent operation, which Victor has now publicly, at least to you, disavowed. The room was very quiet around the three of them. Davis looked at Imani with the expression of someone recalibrating their understanding of who was in a room. Roman said, he used the meeting to create distance. The truce is real. The names are real. And Victor walks out of tonight with no federal exposure, 2 fewer internal problems for him because I'll remove the assets he just burned, and a D'Angelo organization that is occupied with internal house cleaning for the next month. Does that change anything? Imani said. About the truce? About what you decided. Roman was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. It doesn't change what I decided. It changes how I feel about Victor's character, which was never something I was optimistic about to begin with. He looked at Carver. Let the federal team know he's gone, not as a flag, just as information. We're not going to pursue Victor tonight. Carver nodded. And the 2 names, Roman said. Tomorrow. Handle it cleanly. Yes. Davis retreated. Carver pulled out his phone. The machinery of Roman's world continued to operate around them with the particular efficiency of systems that had been built for exactly this kind of moment. Imani stood beside Roman and looked at the lake through the window, which was still black and enormous and entirely unimpressed with everything that had just happened in its general vicinity. He outmaneuvered you, she said. Not as accusation, as fact. Yes, Roman said. Are you all right with that? He considered the question. I'm all right with the outcome. Victor wants quiet. I want to build something that lasts longer than my reputation. Those 2 things can coexist without either of us trusting the other. He paused. Whether I'm all right with being outmaneuvered, ask me in a week. She almost smiled. That's honest. I'm practicing. They left the Meridian at 11:40. The motorcade was smaller on the way out, 3 vehicles instead of 5. The security footprint reduced now that the night's events had resolved into their various outcomes. Roman sat beside her in the back of the second car, and they drove through the Chicago night, and neither of them spoke for several minutes, which was not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that exists between people who have been through something together and have not yet found the words for all of it and are not forcing the process. Maya was brought to Roman's house by Greta at midnight. She arrived in her pajamas, the ones with small octopi on them, that she had chosen herself at a target 2 months ago, and that she defended against all suggested replacements with an intensity that Roman said reminded him of his grandmother. And she was asleep on her feet in the way that children are asleep on their feet when they have been kept up past their time and are operating on determination alone. Imani was in the kitchen when Greta brought her in. Maya walked through the door, registered Imani's presence with eyes that were 3/4 closed, walked directly to her, and leaned against her side with her full weight in the specific, unguarded way that children make physical contact with people they have decided to trust. Imani put her arm around her. Greta looked at this. Her expression did the thing it had done at the dinner 3 weeks ago. The private decision, the upward shift. "She asked for you," Greta said quietly to Imani. "When things got loud on the radio, she asked where you were." Imani looked down at the top of Maya's head, which smelled like the children's shampoo she had seen in Roman's bathroom, the one in the yellow bottle. She felt Maya's weight against her side. "I was fine," Imani said, more to Maya than to Greta, even though Maya was mostly asleep. Maya made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated something in the language that exhausted 7-year-olds use when they have questions they are too tired to ask properly. "I know," Imani said. "Come on." She walked her to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed while Maya got under the covers, which Maya did with the minimal motion of someone who is conserving the last of their consciousness for essential operations only. "Is everything okay?" Maya asked, her voice muffled by the pillow. "Everything is okay," Imani said. "Dad?" "Dad is fine. He's in the kitchen." A pause. Then, "Your dress was probably really nice." "It was," Imani said. "You would have approved." "Was it a good green?" "It was burgundy." A longer pause. "I don't know what that is." "It's a better red," Imani said. Maya considered this for approximately 4 seconds, and then went entirely and completely asleep, with the immediate finality that only children achieve, her breathing evening out into the slow rhythm of someone who had left the conversation and was not coming back until morning. Imani sat on the edge of the bed for a moment after that. She sat in the dark of this child's room with the small nightlight in the corner putting a low warm light on the drawings taped to the wall. Sea creatures mostly, rendered in the enthusiastic and anatomically ambitious style of a 7-year-old who had strong opinions about marine biology. And she breathed, and she let the night move through her in the way that significant nights have to move through you eventually. All of it. The dress and the corridor and Sophie's grip and the stage and Vanessa's cracked voice and Victor's empty chair and Roman's hand at her back. She let it move through and she sat on the other side of it. Then she stood up, smoothed the blanket at Maya's shoulder, and went back to the kitchen. Roman was at the counter with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled, and he was making tea, which she had learned was what he did when the night had been the kind of night that required something to do with his hands that was not related to anything consequential. He made it carefully. Loose leaf, a specific brand that his mother had bought and that he still ordered from the same place because some things you keep for reasons you don't fully examine. He looked up when she came in. "She's asleep," Imani said. "Good." He set the second cup beside the first. "She asked for you, on the phone, 3 times. "Greta told me." He was quiet for a moment, his back to her, watching the kettle. "When I walked up those stairs tonight and you were standing outside that door in that dress with 8 people behind you, one of them a kid." He stopped, started again. "I have spent 6 years building security around everything I care about. Walls, protocols, people, systems." He turned around. "And the safest thing in that building tonight was you. Moving through it with no protocol and no training and just knowing the building, just being the person who paid attention." Imani leaned against the counter opposite him. "I've been paying attention my whole life," she said. "When you don't have other kinds of leverage, you learn the architecture." He looked at her. "That's what Vanessa never understood," Imani said. "She thought she was taking things from me, the commissions, the customers, She thought diminishing me made her bigger." She reached over and picked up the cup he had set down for her. "She was just teaching me how the room worked, and I kept the lesson." Roman was quiet. "She apologized tonight," Imani said. "I know. I told you I saw." "I don't know if it's real," she said. "I don't know if 3 years of what she did can be resolved in 4 minutes in a ballroom. I don't know if she's capable of changing or if tonight just scared her badly enough to perform change." She wrapped both hands around the cup. But I meant what I said to her. I'm not going to use the position to end her. That's not, she paused. That's not who I want to be when I finally have the power to choose. Roman was watching her. She's going to have to work under me, Imani said, at the boutique, in the division. And that is going to be uncomfortable for both of us. And I'm going to have to make decisions about her based on her work and her conduct, and not based on 3 years of wanting to make her feel exactly 1/10 of what she made me feel. She took a sip of the tea. That's going to take some doing. Yes, Roman said simply. I'm not saying it's going to be fine. I'm saying I'm going to try to do the right thing even when doing the wrong thing would be completely understandable. She looked at him. That's the most I can promise. That's all anyone can promise, he said. They drank tea in the kitchen at 1:15 in the morning, and the city moved around them in its overnight register. Occasional traffic, a distant siren, the radiator in the old part of the house doing what radiators did. The ordinary infrastructure of a city that had no idea what had happened inside one of its lakefront buildings and would not have interrupted its business for it regardless. Imani thought about the boutique. Specifically, she thought about Monday morning, which was 2 days away, which felt both very soon and like the necessary destination of everything that had built up to tonight. Monday morning, she would walk into Elise & Co., not as the woman behind the register with the returns log, not as the woman Vanessa could redirect commissions away from without consequence, not as the woman who was told, with 2 fingers and a laminated badge, that she might be permitted to enter through the back door. She would walk in as the person who ran it. And she was aware, she was completely aware, that this was the part of stories like hers that got simplified in the telling. The arrival at the position, the vindication, the powerful woman commanding the room, the person who mocked her now answering to her. It was a clean narrative, and it was satisfying, and it was also only half the picture, because the other half was the part where the powerful woman had to actually run the thing, had to make the hard personnel decisions, and the budget decisions, and the structural decisions, had to be willing to be wrong and correct and be wrong again, had to resist the very human temptation to use authority as the settling of old scores rather than the building of something better. That was the harder work. That was the work that nobody watched. She was going to do it anyway. 3 days after the gala, Imani walked into Elise & Company at 8:15 in the morning, 45 minutes before the store opened. She wore the same quality of work clothes she had always worn, clean, precise, ironed the night before. The difference was that they were new, bought from a boutique on the south side that she had been meaning to go to for 2 years and had finally gone to on Sunday afternoon with Maya, who had accompanied the shopping trip with the serious advisory energy of a child who had strong opinions about color combinations and was not shy about expressing them. She had a burgundy blouse. Maya had been very pleased about this. She went to the office that had previously belonged to the floor manager, a small, slightly cluttered room behind the main stock area that smelled like old coffee and the particular mix of perfume samples that accumulated in retail spaces. And she sat at the desk and she opened the personnel files and the sales records and the customer satisfaction reports that had been run the previous quarter, and she began reading, not looking for ammunition, looking for the actual picture. The staff began arriving at 8:30. She heard them in the main floor area, the sounds of a store opening, the cases being unlocked, the systems starting up, the specific murmur of people who knew something had changed and were trying to figure out what it meant for them specifically. She gave them 20 minutes. Then she walked out onto the floor. They were all there. Destiny, Kayla, the part-time girls. 3 other associates she had worked beside for varying lengths of time, some of whom had laughed and some of whom had looked away, and some of whom had, occasionally and at personal cost, been decent. And Vanessa. Vanessa was standing near the accessories display, the same one she had reorganized twice on the day Roman walked in, and she was dressed impeccably, and her posture was deployed, and she was looking at Imani with an expression that had been stripped of everything except a kind of raw, undefended attention. Imani looked at all of them. She did not make a speech. She did not recite a list of changes, or deliver a vision statement, or perform the arrival of authority. She was not interested in performance. "Good morning," she said. "I want to talk to each of you individually today, starting after opening. I've spent the morning with the records. I have some questions about how things are structured, and I want to hear from you directly about what's working and what isn't." She paused. "I'm not coming in here to settle anything. I'm coming in here to do a job. I expect the same from you. She looked at each of them in turn. Not a long look, just enough to be direct. Customers start coming through the door in 20 minutes, she said. Let's be ready. She turned and went back to the office. Through the door, she heard the floor settle into its opening routine. She heard Destiny say something quiet to Kayla. She heard the cases being finished. She heard nothing from Vanessa, which was, for now, enough. The conversation with Vanessa happened on the third day. Imani asked her to come to the office at the end of her shift, and Vanessa came, and she sat in the chair across the desk with her hands in her lap, and her posture still holding, and her eyes doing what they had been doing since the gala, that stripped, undefended attention, the look of someone who had stopped trying to manage what their face communicated. Imani said, "Your sales numbers are the highest on the floor, have been for 2 years." Vanessa looked slightly uncertain, as if she had prepared for a different opening. "Your customer retention rate is also the highest," Imani said. "Clients come back to you specifically. That's not nothing. That's actually hard to build." She put down the report she was looking at. "I need to know if you can do that same work under a different standard. Not different in terms of product knowledge or sales skill, different in terms of how you treat the people around you. The customers, yes, but also the staff." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said. Imani looked at her. "I mean, I want to say yes," Vanessa said. "But I've been doing what I do for so long that I'm not sure how much of it is strategy and how much of it is just who I became." She stopped. "That sounds like an excuse. I'm not trying to make it an excuse." "It's not an excuse," Imani said. "It's actually the right question to be asking yourself." She leaned back slightly in the chair. "I'm not going to tell you I trust you yet. I'm not there. But I'm also not going to make this a punishment. You either meet the standard or you don't, and I'm going to evaluate you on your work, not on the history between us." "That's more than I would have given you," Vanessa said quietly. The words were not self-pitying. They were just accurate, and Vanessa knew they were accurate, and she said them with the specific weight of a person who is looking at themselves without the buffer of justification and finding the view difficult. "Probably," Imani said. "But I'm not you." Vanessa absorbed that. She nodded once. She stood. She was almost at the door when Imani said, "Vanessa." She turned. "Preston Hale is going to be facing federal charges for at minimum the next 18 months. That process is going to be public, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and people are going to connect your name to it, because that's how these things work." Imani held her gaze. "I'm not going to add to that. What happens with his case is not something I'm involved in. But I wanted you to know that I know it's coming, and I know it's going to be hard, and—" She stopped. "I'm not going to make it harder." Vanessa stood in the doorway. Her jaw moved. "Why?" she said. "Just that." Imani thought about it. The real answer, not the clean one. "Because you're going to find out who you actually are on the other side of a hard year," she said. "And I'd rather see who that is than close the door before we get there." Vanessa looked at her for a long moment. Then she left. Imani sat in the office for a while after, listening to the sounds of the floor. Customers coming in now, the register, the movement of inventory. And she did not feel triumphant. She felt tired in the good way. The way that comes after doing something difficult that was worth doing, and she felt clear-headed, and she felt underneath everything the specific and uncomplicated satisfaction of knowing exactly who she was and why she made the choices she made. 6 months passed. Spring came to Chicago the way it always did, reluctantly, in pieces, promising things, and withdrawing them, and then finally delivering, in late April, an afternoon that made you understand why people stayed in a city with winters like that. Imani had been running the flagship customer experience division for the full 6 months. She had made 23 personnel decisions, 11 of them difficult, 3 of them the kind that kept her awake the night before and did not keep her awake the night after, because the alternative to making hard decisions was pretending they weren't necessary, and she had no patience for that pretense. She had restructured the evaluation system so that staff were assessed on measurable customer experience metrics alongside sales, return rates, complaint resolution, repeat customer attribution. Numbers didn't lie about how you treated people the way managers sometimes did. Destiny had left in week 2, which had not been a surprise. Kayla had stayed and had turned out, somewhat to Imani's own surprise, to be quietly skilled at exactly the kind of thoughtful customer work that had never been valued under the previous structure because it wasn't visible in the commission sheets. Vanessa had stayed. She had been, for the first month, watchful and careful in the way of someone who is learning new rules and is not sure if they're permanent. In the second month, something shifted, gradually, without announcement. The calibrated cruelty that had been the texture of her interactions simply began to disappear. What replaced it was not warmth, exactly. Vanessa was not a warm person by nature, and Imani did not require her to perform warmth. What replaced it was something more like professionalism, with its full definition restored. Competence extended to the people around her, not just to the customers who generated commission. It was not a transformation, it was a recalibration. Imani did not pretend it was more than it was, and she did not pretend it was less. Roman came into the boutique on a Saturday afternoon in April. He came in wearing a plain gray Henley and jeans, his jacket the same worn one he'd been wearing the first day, and he came in alone, and a new associate named Jordan, 23 years old, 2 weeks into her first retail position, looked up from the display she was arranging and crossed the floor toward him immediately. "Hi," Jordan said. "Can I help you find something?" Roman looked at her, that assessing look, the one that held a beat longer than most people's. "I'm looking for something for my daughter," he said. "She's turning 8. "Oh, that's a fun age," Jordan said, and she meant it the same way Imani had meant it. Not as a performance, just as someone who had actually considered it. "What's she into right now? Does she have a color thing going on?" Roman glanced across the showroom. Imani was standing near the back, talking to a client, and she saw him see her, and she saw him smile. The real one, not the corners of the eyes version. The actual one that she had learned was rare and that she had stopped taking for granted because things that were rare deserved to not be taken for granted. She looked away. Back to her client. She knew he was in capable hands. Jordan walked him to the accessories. She asked him 3 follow-up questions. She pulled 2 options and explained the reasoning behind each one without being condescending or performative. She was doing exactly what this job required when it was done right, which was seeing the person in front of her rather than the category she'd put them in before they opened their mouth. Roman bought a scarf, different from the first one, lighter, for spring, in a color that Maya had apparently decided was the right shade of blue this week, which Jordan had helped him identify through a series of specific questions about the blue in question that made him slightly uncertain and ultimately confident in the choice. He was at the door when Imani appeared beside him. "How was the service?" she said. "Excellent." He looked at her. She asked good questions. "She's new," Imani said. "She's going to be very good." "She reminded me of someone," Roman said. Imani looked at him. "The first person who helped me in this store," he said. "Asked the right questions. Didn't look at the jacket." "I remember," Imani said. "I know you do." They stood at the door of the boutique, the April light coming through the tall windows and landing on the floor in the particular way that spring light in Chicago landed, like something that had traveled a long way and arrived slightly surprised to have made it. Roman had the bag in his hand. The store was operating quietly around them, the ordinary business of a Saturday afternoon. "Maya wants to come in," Roman said. "She wants to see where you work." "She's seen where I work." "She wants to see it now," he said, "when it's yours." Imani was quiet for a moment. She thought about the 8-year-old with the emerald scarf wrapped around a backpack strap, the marine biologist, the child who had held a stranger's hand for 30 seconds in a corridor, and then, apparently, mentioned the stranger's hair to everyone who would listen for 3 weeks afterward. "Saturday after next," Imani said. "Bring her. She can tell me if anything's wrong with the displays." "She's going to have a lot of opinions about the displays," Roman said. "I know," Imani said. "That's why I'm asking her." He almost laughed. The real one again. She was still getting used to it, still registering it every time it appeared, because it was rare and because she had been there when it stopped being something he kept locked up and had learned, slowly, imperfectly, at some cost to both of them, that the people who earned it could be trusted with it. He left through the front door. Imani stood at the window for a moment and watched him go. The plain jacket, the worn jeans, the man who could clear a room with his name walking down Michigan Avenue in the April light like anyone else, like a person who had somewhere to be and something to carry. Then she turned back to the floor. Jordan was already with another customer, asking the right questions. Kayla was at the register, handling a return with the patient, precise courtesy that Imani had been watching develop in her over 6 months. Near the accessories wall, Vanessa was showing a woman something, a silk piece held up to the light, and her voice was even and her manner was focused, and there was nothing in it that Imani had to manage or monitor or brace herself against. The store was different, not perfect. It was not going to be perfect. There would be difficult days and personnel problems and decisions that didn't go the way she intended, and customers who were impossible to please, and structural issues with the corporate chain above her that she was still learning how to navigate. She was not under any illusion that the hard work was behind her. The hard work was not behind her. The hard work was the ongoing condition of doing this job the right way, which was the only way she was interested in doing it. But the store was different. She had walked into this building 3 years ago with ironed clothes and small gold earrings and a grandmother's studs and the specific, durable determination of someone who had decided their patience was not their ceiling. She had picked up every badge, absorbed every laugh, navigated every redirected commission, and calibrated slight and systematic underestimation. And she had not let any of it tell her who she was. That was the part nobody in this building had understood about her, for 3 years, and that she had never been able to explain to them, not because she didn't have the words, but because it was not the kind of thing you explained. It was the kind of thing you demonstrated, slowly, over a long time, in the accumulated evidence of showing up and staying and doing the work, even when the work was being made harder than it needed to be. She had been demonstrating it. Now the room could see it. Imani walked back across the floor toward the client she had left, who was waiting with the patience of a woman who had been well served and was comfortable enough to wait. And Imani settled back into the conversation with the ease of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and why she was doing it, and the April light came through the tall windows and fell across the floor of Elise and Compton, and the store operated around her with the specific, unremarkable, essential rhythm of a place that had remembered what it was supposed to be. And that was enough. That was, in fact, everything.